The Complete Story of Haida's. The Complete Story of Haida's Tower of Flame. Welcome back. Tonight, we're going to explore one of Dark Souls 2's most hauntingly beautiful locations. A place where an ancient kingdom meets the endless sea, where silent nights wait in eternal vigil, and where the very architecture speaks of gods who walked among mortals. This is the story of Haida's Tower of Flame. The Flooded Ruins. Your journey to Haida begins in Majula, that melancholic hub where the undead gather beneath an endless sky. Behind the old woman's dwelling, through a passage you might easily miss, there's a tunnel that slopes downward into darkness. The stone here is old, worn smooth by countless feet over ages you can barely fathom. As you descend, the air grows thick with moisture, and soon you hear it, the sound of water lapping against stone. The tunnel opens into a waterway, and before you stretches something remarkable. Towers rise from the sea, like the bones of giants, connected by stone walkways that seem to float upon the water's surface. The architecture is unlike anything else in Drangleic. It's grand, almost impossibly so, with sweeping arches and pillars that speak of a civilization that understood beauty as well as function. The whole scene is bathed in an ethereal light, the kind that makes you question whether you're looking at reality or some half-remembered dream. This is your first glimpse of Haida's Tower of Flame, and even in its ruined state, it takes your breath away. The towers stand defiant against the elements, their white stone somehow pristine despite the obvious age. Somewhere in the distance, you can see the tower itself, the centerpiece of this drowned kingdom, its gallery still flickering with firelight after all these centuries. It serves as a lighthouse now, warning away ships from these treacherous waters. But once it meant something more. Once it was a beacon of an entirely different kind. As you step onto the first platform, you notice him. An old knight, massive and imposing, standing motionless with a greatsword nearly as tall as you are. His armor is ancient, rusted and worn, yet somehow still intact. He doesn't move at your approach, not immediately. There's something patient about his stillness, as though he's been waiting here for so long that a few more moments mean nothing. Only when you draw close enough does he lumber into motion, his movements deliberate and heavy, each swing of that enormous blade calculated to end you in a single stroke. But there's something else. Off to your left, sitting against the base of a pillar, you see another figure. This one wears armor of a different kind, white and gleaming, unmarred by rust or decay. Arrows protrude from various points in his armor, most prominently from the visor of his helmet. He sits hunched over, completely still, and as you pass he makes no move to attack. This is a Haida knight, and his passive nature only makes him more unnerving. You can hear his breathing, heavy and labored, echoing within that closed helm. The contrast between these two types of sentinels is striking. The old knights appear to be remnants, relics of an era that has long passed, though their exact origins remain unclear. The Haida knights are something else entirely, something connected to this place in ways that defy easy explanation. Their armor bears Haida's iconography, and their weapons are forged from an unknown special alloy that became the inspiration for Drangleic's brass den steel. Time and tide have claimed much of this kingdom, but these warriors remain, locked in their eternal vigil, for reasons that become more mysterious the deeper you delve. As you explore these initial platforms, navigating around the old knights, with their telegraphed but devastating attacks, you begin to piece together the layout. The area is surprisingly open, with multiple paths winding between towers and across bridges. Down one set of stairs, you find a bonfire, a welcome respite. The sound of the sea is constant here, a reminder that this place exists on the boundary between land and water, between the world you know and something far older. The items you discover scattered throughout tell their own stories. A soul of a nameless soldier here, a human effigy there. These are the leavings of those who came before you, undead who walked these same stones and either triumphed or fell. And then there are the levers, mysterious mechanisms that seem to serve no immediate purpose. You pull one, and somewhere across the way, you see a platform rise. Another lever, another platform. They're preparing something, these mechanisms, setting a stage for an encounter you haven't yet reached. The deeper you venture, the more you notice the architectural details. The buildings here aren't like the rough stonework of Tranquil proper. They're refined, elegant, with decorative elements that serve no defensive purpose. Statues line the walkways, depicting figures with the heads of birds, their arms raised toward the sky. They're reminiscent of something you've seen before, if you've delved into the darker corners of the world's history. They recall the giants of Anor Londo, that city of the gods from another age entirely. And that's when the first piece of the puzzle clicks into place. This isn't just some random ruined kingdom. Haida has a connection to that ancient divine city, to the gods who once ruled before the fire began to fade. But the connection is imperfect, incomplete. Whoever built Haida knew of Anor Londo, but didn't fully understand it. They mimicked what they could remember, or what they'd been told, creating this beautiful echo of divinity filtered through mortal hands. The sea laps at the stones. The old knights continue their patient watch. The Haida knights breathe their labored breaths, and above it all the tower of flame burns on, casting its light across water and stone, refusing to be extinguished even as everything else has fallen into ruin. This is Haida, and its story is one of glory, loss, and the desperate attempt to recapture something that was never meant to last. The Lost Kingdom. To understand Haida's Tower of Flame, we must first travel back through the mists of time to an age when gods still walked the earth. Long before Drangleic rose to prominence, before Vendrick claimed his throne, there was Anor Londo, the city of the gods built in the Age of Fire, home to Lord Gwyn and his divine family. It was a place of wonder and terror in equal measure, where giants served as sentinels, and the very architecture seemed to defy mortal comprehension. Among Gwyn's children was Guinevere, the Princess of Sunlight. Descriptions paint her as a figure of tremendous grace and power, though later we would learn that the image we encountered in Anor Londo was merely an illusion crafted by her brother Gwyndolin. The real Guinevere, it seems, had other plans entirely. For when the fire began to fade, and Gwyn made his terrible sacrifice, when the gods started to abandon the city that had been their home, Guinevere was among those who left. The item descriptions tell us she fled Anor Londo along with many other deities, and that she later became the wife of flame god Flann. This detail is crucial, because Flann is connected to Haida through the Tower of Flame itself. While the game never explicitly states that Guinevere and Flann founded Haida, the evidence strongly points in that direction. Flann was associated with fire in its most enduring form, not the wild blaze of Gwyn's linking, but something more sustained, more reliable. a flame that could guide rather than consume. The lighthouse burning at Hyda's center aligns perfectly with this divine domain. Where exactly did Guinevere and Flan settle? The evidence strongly suggests it was here, in what would become known as Hyda. They built a kingdom on the coast, constructing it in the image of the home they'd left behind. The architecture mirrors Anor Londo's grand style, with its soaring pillars and expansive halls. But there are differences, subtle ways in which the design deviates from the original. The most telling are those statues with bird heads, clear representations of gods, but rendered with features that seem borrowed from other mythologies, mixing the image of Gwyn with symbols more commonly associated with solar deities, like Ra. This suggests that the builders of Hyda had incomplete knowledge of the gods they were meant to honor. They knew of Gwyn, knew his importance, but the specifics had become muddled through time and distance. What they created was a kind of hybrid, a place where divine inspiration met mortal limitation. It's both a tribute and a mistranslation, beautiful in its own right, but clearly separate from its inspiration. The kingdom of Hyda flourished, at least for a time. The Tower of Flame became a landmark, its eternal fire visible for miles across the sea. A cathedral was built, grand and imposing, intended as a place of worship and gathering. The Way of Blue, one of the oldest covenants still remembered in Drangleick's time, was founded here. It was a humble prayer that spread naturally among those seeking help, a covenant not of conquest but of protection. This tells us something about Hyda's character. Unlike many kingdoms that rose and fell through conquest and bloodshed, Hyda seems to have valued different virtues: protection of the weak, mutual aid, community. The Hyda knights who served this kingdom were renowned for their skill and their unusual equipment. Their weapons and armor were made from a special alloy, one so durable that even after what must be centuries of exposure to sea spray and harsh conditions, they remain pristine. When Drangleick's smiths later tried to replicate this alloy, the best they could manage was Braddon steel, a similar but clearly inferior material. The composition of the original Hyda alloy remains a mystery, a secret lost when the kingdom fell. Many of these knights were lancers, wielding weapons typically associated with mounted combat. The item descriptions note that handling a lance on foot requires considerable training, yet the Hyda knights mastered this difficult art. This might seem like a random detail, but it speaks to the martial tradition of the kingdom. These weren't mere soldiers, but highly trained warriors who had dedicated themselves to mastering even the most challenging combat styles. But then something catastrophic happened. The exact nature of the disaster is never explicitly stated, but the evidence is all around you as you navigate Hyda's ruins. The kingdom sank into the sea, not gradually, not through simple erosion, but suddenly and completely enough that the entire civilization was swallowed by the waves. Buildings that once stood proud above the waterline now rise from the depths, their lower levels completely submerged. Theories abound about what caused this calamity. Some suggest natural disaster, perhaps an earthquake that caused the land to sink, or a tsunami that overwhelmed the kingdom's defenses. Others point to more deliberate causes. There's speculation that Drangleick, in its expansionist phase under King Vendrick, may have played a role. The theory goes that Hyda was built behind bulwarks to keep out the sea, much like certain real-world cities. If an attacking force couldn't breach the kingdom's defenses through conventional means, they might instead destroy those bulwarks and let the ocean do their work for them. The presence of Vendrick's dragon riders in the area lends some credence to this theory. Why else would the king's elite forces be stationed in these ruins, unless Drangleic had some claim or interest here? Perhaps Vendrick conquered Hyder, or perhaps he arrived after its fall to claim what remained. The truth is lost to time, buried beneath the waves along with so much else. What we know for certain is that whether Hyder referred to the kingdom itself or merely to the land it occupied is unclear. No records survive that date back far enough to say with certainty. All that remains is what we can see and piece together from the fragments that endure. The Way of Blue has its origins in Hyder. The Tower of Flame still burns. And the nights, both old and those of Hyder itself, continue their vigil. The kingdom is gone, swallowed by the sea, but it hasn't been forgotten. Pilgrims still came here, even in Drangleic's time, drawn by tales of the Cathedral of Blue and the holy relics that might still be found in its halls. Licia of Lindelt, that duplicitous cleric we'll discuss later, made the journey expecting to find a bustling centre of faith. Instead, she found ruins and silence, hardly a soul to be seen. The disappointment in her voice when she speaks of this tells us how far Hyder had fallen from its former glory. And yet, there's something magnificent about the ruins. Standing on those platforms, looking out across the flooded towers, you can still sense what this place once was. You can imagine the kingdom in its prime, before the waters came. Citizens walking those same stones, looking up at the Tower of Flame with pride, knowing they lived in a place touched by the divine. Knights training in the plazas, their lances flashing in the sunlight. Priests in the cathedral, preserving the ancient miracles and scriptures that had been passed down from Anor Londo itself. Hyder was an attempt to preserve something from the Age of Gods, to carry forward the legacy of Guinevere and the divine family, even as the fire faded and the world moved into darker times. In that sense, it was doomed from the start. You can't capture divinity in stone, can't freeze a moment of glory and make it last forever. But they tried, the people of Hyder. They built their towers and lit their flame and hoped it would be enough. Now only the ruins remain, and the sea has claimed everything they built. But even in failure, even in ruin, Hyder's Tower of Flame endures as a testament to what mortals can achieve when they reach for something greater than themselves. The tower still burns. The nights still wait. And somewhere in those flooded halls, the memory of gods lingers on. The old knights. When you first encounter an old knight in Hyder's Tower of Flame, the initial impression is one of overwhelming size and menace. These armored giants stand easily twice your height, their rusted plate armor speaking of unimaginable age. Each one is armed with a weapon that seems designed to kill with a single blow. The great swordsmen wield blades nearly as tall as they are, while others carry ultra-great swords or massive hammers that can crush bone and armor with equal ease. But spend any time fighting them, and you quickly realize something crucial. These knights are old. Not just in the sense of having existed for a long time, but old in a way that has fundamentally changed them. Their movements are slow, telegraphed, almost arthritic. They lumber rather than stride, their attacks taking so long to wind up that a patient fighter can easily avoid them. There's a tragedy in this slowness, a sense that these once mighty warriors have been diminished by the passage of countless years. The armor they wear is corroded and deteriorating, rust eating away at metal that was once polished and proud. The descriptions note that this equipment is so ancient that it's impossible to identify its origin with any certainty. No records exist that date back to when it was first forged. This tells us something profound about just how old these knights truly are. They predate even the earliest histories preserved in Tranquil, reaching back to an age that has been almost entirely forgotten. Who were they when they were new? What kingdom did they serve before Haida, before the flood, before the long centuries reduced them to these shambling remnants? The evidence points in intriguing directions. Their equipment and fighting style bear the hallmarks of a formal military organization, which would place them as part of the standing army for whatever civilization first occupied this coastal land. The parallels with Anor Londo's giant sentinels are worth noting as well. Similar scale, similar purpose, which raises the possibility of some connection to that divine city or its martial traditions. What's particularly interesting is their behavior. Despite their obvious decay, despite the rust and deterioration, these knights still fight with a kind of discipline. They have set attack patterns, combinations that suggest formal training rather than mindless aggression. The greatsword wielders have their 3/ pattern, always the same sequence. The hammer wielders use devastating overhead slams. Even in their diminished state, they retain the muscle memory of warriors who were once among the best. But they're not invincible. In fact, once you understand their patterns, they become almost pitiable opponents. Their attacks are so slow that you can circle around them with ease, staying just out of range of those massive weapons. Strike weapons are particularly effective against them, perhaps because their ancient armor has lost much of its structural integrity. A well-placed blow from a mace can stagger them, and a few more will end the fight entirely. There's one old knight who stands out from the rest, found in a side area guarded by several of his fellows. This unique knight wields a great hammer, and, when defeated, drops a sublime bone dust, one of the precious items used to upgrade your Estus flask. The significance of this isn't immediately clear until you remember what sublime bone dust represents. It's ash of an undead who was burned long ago, someone who was once powerful and whose remains still carry that power. Why does this particular old knight carry such an item? Was he once human beneath that armor? Another undead warrior who achieved something significant before succumbing to hollowing? The presence of old knights specifically in Haida raises questions about the kingdom's history. If they predate Haida itself, then they must have been here before Guinevere and Flan arrived, before the towers were built and the flame was lit. This opens several interpretive possibilities. They might represent the original inhabitants of this land, a native force that encountered the gods when they came seeking a new home. From there, we could infer either conquest, a subjugation of these ancient warriors who were then incorporated into Haida's defense, or perhaps they came later, drawn to the kingdom's glory and seeking to serve something greater than themselves. There's also the question of why they're still here, still fighting, still patrolling these flooded ruins. Old knights are found throughout Tranquil, from the Dragon Eyrie to Tranquil Castle itself, indicating they were widely deployed as guardians or soldiers at some point in the kingdom's history. But the concentration here in Haida feels significant. The most straightforward interpretation would be that they were stationed here as guards, tasked with protecting something within the ruins. If that's the case, they've maintained their post long after whatever they were guarding has been lost or claimed. Their programming, if we can call it that, seems simple but absolute. They detect intruders and eliminate them. There's no negotiation, No possibility of reasoning with them. They're locked into their role as guardians, unable to deviate even as the world around them has transformed beyond recognition. The kingdom they served is gone, drowned beneath the sea. The rulers they obeyed have long since departed or perished. Yet still they remain at their posts, because that's what they were made to do. In Scholar of the First Sin, some old knights appear in new locations, including one posted in the shrine of Amana, and several within Tranquil Castle itself. This distribution suggests they were valued as elite guards, positioned at important locations throughout the kingdom. But their appearance in Haida predates this later deployment, making these ruins their original home, or at least one of their earliest postings. Fighting an old knight is less a test of skill and more a test of patience. You wait for the wind-up, dodge the attack, strike once or twice, and then retreat before the next swing begins. It's methodical, almost meditative, and in its own way it mirrors the knights themselves. They're patient in their slowness, content to take as long as necessary to fell their opponent. You must match that patience, refuse to be greedy, refuse to let their intimidating size push you into mistakes. There's something melancholic about these encounters. You're not fighting warriors in their prime, but the shadows of warriors, the remnants of something that once meant something. Each old knight you defeat is one less connection to that ancient past, one less fragment of a history that's already mostly lost. They don't drop anything particularly valuable, just their worn equipment and a modest soul reward. But in their own way, they're priceless, irreplaceable. They're living history, or as close to living as anything can be in the world of Dark Souls. The old knights of Haida's Tower of Flame are guardians without a kingdom, soldiers without a war to fight, remnants of an age so distant that even its name has been forgotten. They stand as testaments to duty carried to its ultimate extreme, to the idea that some oaths outlast everything, even meaning itself. As you navigate past them, avoiding their ponderous swings or putting them down with efficient strikes, spare a thought for what they once were, champions perhaps, heroes of their own age, now reduced to obstacles, barely remembered shadows standing watch over ruins no one cares about anymore. But they endure. That's what they do. What they've always done. The sea claimed Haida, time claimed their strength, and decay claimed their glory. But they're still here, still fighting, still performing the duty they were given so very long ago. In the world of Dark Souls, where even gods can fall and kingdoms crumble to dust, that kind of persistence is its own form of victory. The Haida Knights, Scholar of the First Sin. The Haida Knights remain passive until you defeat the Dragon Rider boss. Once that champion falls, something changes. The knights rise from their seated positions, and instead of waiting passively, they begin patrolling the area, actively hostile to your presence. This behavior only occurs in the Scholar of the First Sin version. In the original Dark Souls 2, only specific Haida Knights were aggressive from the start. This behavior change is one of the most interesting design decisions in Scholar of the First Sin. It creates a sense of escalation, where defeating the boss doesn't make the area safer, but actually more dangerous. Players who thought they'd cleared out Haida's Tower of Flame suddenly find themselves facing swift, aggressive enemies in places that were previously safe. From a lore perspective, this transformation invites interpretation. The Dragon Rider's presence might have been keeping the Hyder Knights in check, or his death could signal to them that order has collapsed, though the mechanisms behind this behavior shift remain deliberately ambiguous. The variety of weapons Hyder Knights use is also worth noting. You can find them wielding swords, spears, and lances, each with slightly different movesets and ranges. The lance wielders are particularly dangerous, their reach allowing them to strike from surprising distances. And then there's the unique Hyder Knight found in the gutter, wearing an iron mask instead of the standard helm, and guaranteed to drop the Hyder lance. His presence in that dark, miserable place so far from the ruins of his kingdom raises even more questions about temporal displacement and the strange rules governing these warriors' existence. What's particularly poignant about the Hyder Knights is their loyalty. Even displaced in time, even long after their kingdom has fallen and their purpose has ended, they remain at their posts. They don't abandon their duty, don't seek some new purpose or master. They sit and wait, breathing heavily behind those closed helms, ready to rise and defend a kingdom that no longer exists against threats that no longer matter. There's a theory worth examining here, though it remains speculative. Some players have noted that the breathing sounds the Hyder Knights make are identical to those made by Vendrick in his hollow state, and by Artorias in the first game's DLC. This could simply be asset reuse, a practical decision by the development team. On the other hand, it might hint at something deeper, some connection between these hollow warriors and the Hyder Knights who sit in eternal vigil. The parallel is intriguing, even if we can't draw definitive conclusions from it. What makes a Hyder Knight? Is it the armor, the training, the oath they swore? Or is it something more fundamental, something to do with their nature as beings displaced from their proper time? We know from the broader Dark Souls lore that powerful souls can persist and reincarnate, finding new forms across vast spans of time. The Hyder Knights might function similarly, souls bound to their duty so strongly that they continue to manifest even when everything else has changed. It's one interpretation among several, but it aligns with what we understand about how souls work in this world. Fighting a Hyder Knight is always a risk-reward proposition. They're dangerous enough to kill unwary players quickly, but skilled enough fighters can parry and riposte them for massive damage. Their equipment, when it drops, is valuable both for its stats and for the window it provides into Hyder's lost techniques. Each sword, each spear, each piece of pristine white armor is a fragment of that drowned kingdom, a piece of history that has somehow survived when everything else has been claimed by the sea. As you progress through Hyder's Tower of Flame, the Hyder Knights serve as a constant reminder that you're walking through something greater than simple ruins. This was a kingdom, a civilization, a place where warriors trained and fought and swore oaths that they would maintain even unto the end of time itself. The old knights are the servants, the hired help, the soldiers who did their duty because it was their job. But the Hyder Knights are something more. They're the true believers, the ones who gave everything to their kingdom and continue giving it even now, long after any reasonable hope has died. Their passivity, when it's present, feels like a question. They sit and watch you pass, and you can almost imagine what they're thinking beneath those helms. Is this one a threat? Should I rise? Should I fight? Or should I let them go, one more stranger picking through the bones of my fallen home, searching for whatever scraps of value might remain? The fact that they choose patience, that they give you the benefit of the doubt, makes the moment when you finally provoke them all the more meaningful. And when you do provoke them, when they rise and draw their weapons and come at you with all the skill and speed they possess, there's a kind of relief in it. Finally, action. Finally, purpose. Finally, something to do besides sit and breathe and remember a kingdom that no longer exists. Even if it's a fight they'll lose, even if you'll cut them down and move on to whatever lies deeper in the ruins, at least they're fighting. At least they're doing what they were trained to do, what they swore to do, what they've been waiting to do for longer than anyone can remember. The Haida Knights are waiting warriors, displaced sentinels, watching over a kingdom that drowned while they weren't looking. They're the last defenders of Haida, maintaining their vigil, not because they expect anyone to save, or because they believe the kingdom can be restored, but because they don't know how to be anything else. They are knights of Haida, and that's all they need to be. That's all they'll ever be, until the last of them falls, and the kingdom's final defenders are gone forever. The Dragon Rider. The first time you see him, the Dragon Rider stands as an imposing silhouette against the pale stone of Haida's architecture. Clad in deep red or black armor depending on his location, wielding a massive halberd with casual ease, he represents something different from the knights you've encountered so far. This is no ancient remnant or temporally displaced warrior. The Dragon Rider is one of King Vendrick's elite, a champion of Drangleic, and his presence in these ruins tells us that Vendrick's reach extended even to this drowned kingdom. The lore surrounding the Dragon Riders is both grand and grim. They were among the most prestigious soldiers in all of Drangleic, warriors who mounted worms and brought chaos to the battlefield with their unparalleled strength. The descriptions paint a picture of aerial cavalry, knights astride flying beasts, raining destruction on enemies who had no defense against such tactics. In an age before widespread understanding of dragons and their kin, the sight of a dragon rider descending from the sky must have been absolutely terrifying. But becoming a dragon rider wasn't a matter of simply signing up or being appointed. The training was described as arduous and fraught with peril. Aspiring dragon riders had to learn not just combat techniques, but how to command a worm, one of the most dangerous and unpredictable creatures in existence. The worms themselves were not tamed in any conventional sense. They were wild, deadly, and perfectly willing to turn on those who would ride them. The failure rate was catastrophic. Those who couldn't cut it, who lacked the skill or will or simple luck to master their mount, were torn apart by the very worms they sought to command. This wasn't training with a risk of failure. This was training where failure meant death, immediate and brutal. Only those who passed this nightmarish test were allowed to join the Dragon Rider's ranks. And even then, the bond between rider and worm was never guaranteed. One mistake, one moment of weakness, and the beast might remember what it was and take back its freedom in the most violent way possible. The Dragon Riders who survived their training became key figures in Vendrick's conquests. They were part of the force that crushed Drangleic's former inhabitants and erected the kingdom upon their graves. This tells us that the Dragon Riders weren't just defenders but active participants in Vendrick's imperial expansion. They were conquerors, warriors who helped build the kingdom through blood and fire, and the terror inspired by worms screaming through the sky. Their presence in Haida's Tower of Flame takes on additional significance with this context. Was Haida among the lands conquered by Vendrick? The ruins certainly predate Drangleic itself, but the kingdom may have still had inhabitants when Vendrick's forces arrived. Perhaps the dragon rider stationed here was part of the force that claimed these territories for Drangleic, or perhaps he was posted here later, after Vendrick established control over the region. The actual boss fight with the dragon rider in Haida's Tower of Flame is notable for its gimmick as much as for the warrior himself. He fights atop a circular platform that's initially quite small, bordered by water on all sides. One good thrust attack from the dragon rider can send you flying off the edge to an instant death in the sea below. This makes positioning crucial, and it also explains those levers you encountered earlier in the area. If you pulled those levers, you raised additional platforms, expanding the fighting arena and eliminating the instant death threat. It's a clever piece of level design that rewards exploration and forward thinking. But interestingly, many players choose to ignore the levers entirely, either through ignorance or because they want the additional challenge. Fighting the dragon rider on the small platform, where one mistake means plummeting to your doom, is certainly more intense than fighting him with plenty of room to maneuver. There's even a cheese strategy that some players employ. If you don't pull the levers and enter the arena, the dragon rider will begin walking toward you. Position yourself correctly near the gap between the small starting platform and the expanded arena space, and you can bait him into doing his thrust attack. The angle will be such that he throws himself off the platform entirely, dying to fall damage before the fight has really begun. It's a humorous exploit, but it also speaks to the dragon rider's aggressive programming. He's so focused on eliminating the threat before him that he doesn't consider the environmental hazards. In terms of combat, the dragon rider at Haida's Tower of Flame is not particularly difficult compared to other bosses in the game. His attacks are well telegraphed, primarily consisting of wide halberd swings and occasional thrust attacks. The fight is more about positioning and patience than complex patterns or overwhelming aggression. Circle to his right, watch for his tells, dodge or block as appropriate, and punish with a few quick strikes. Repeat until he falls. But the dragon rider is not a one-time encounter. You'll face these warriors multiple times throughout your journey through Drangleic. Twin dragon riders appear as the boss of Drangleic Castle, fighting in tandem and creating a much more dangerous encounter than the solo fight in Haida. Another dragon rider stands alone in the Shrine of Amana, guarding the path to Vendrick's soul. And yet another can be found just outside the fog wall leading to Velstadt in the Undead Crypt, a final sentinel protecting the approach to Vendrick's guardian. This distribution tells us something important. The dragon riders weren't just shock troops or battlefield specialists. They were trusted enough to be posted at critical locations throughout Drangleic, from the outer reaches like Haida to the very heart of the kingdom in Drangleic Castle, to the sacred undead crypt where Vendrick himself wandered in hollow madness. They were Vendrick's most reliable forces, the soldiers he knew would hold their posts even when everything else fell apart. And that's exactly what they did. Long after Vendrick went hollow, long after Drangleic fell into ruin and despair, the dragon riders remained at their posts. They didn't abandon their duty or seek new masters. They stood guard at the locations they'd been assigned, fighting anyone who approached with the same determination they'd shown when the kingdom was at its height. This loyalty is both admirable and tragic. They're defending a kingdom that no longer exists, serving a king who has lost his mind, maintaining order in a realm that has descended into chaos. The dragon rider's armor and weapons can be obtained through various means. and they tell their own story. The armor is heavy and protective, but also ceremonial in its appearance, decorated in ways that speak to the prestige of the rank. This wasn't standard issue equipment for regular soldiers. This was the armor of champions, of warriors who had proven themselves worthy of riding the worms. The halberd and twin blade they wielded were imbued with magic, giving them additional striking power beyond their already considerable weight. There's an interesting note about the Dragon Rider in Haida specifically. Unlike some other locations where you encounter these warriors, the one in the Tower of Flame can be seen before you enter the boss fight proper. If you deal damage to him from outside the arena, that damage will persist, being applied all at once when you enter through the fog gate. This has led to various strategies involving arrows and spells, whittling down his health before the fight even begins. It's another indication that these ruins are strange, that the normal rules don't quite apply in this place, where past and present blur together. The question of why a Dragon Rider was posted in Haida specifically invites several interpretations. From a practical standpoint, the ruins still held value even after the kingdom fell. The Cathedral of Blue was important to the Way of Blue Covenant, and Vendrick may have wanted to maintain some level of control over the area for political or religious reasons. The Haida Knight's presence also indicates there might have been threats in the area that required a powerful guardian to contain. But there's another angle worth considering. Vendrick's quest to end the curse of the undead led him and his brother Aldir to explore many avenues, studying ancient knowledge and conducting experiments that pushed ethical boundaries. The ruins of Haida, with their connection to Guinevere and the divine, might have held secrets that Vendrick hoped to uncover. A Dragon Rider stationed here could have been part of an expedition to search the ruins for clues about the curse or the nature of souls, or any of the other mysteries Vendrick sought to solve. The fact that multiple Dragon Riders appear throughout the game, always as guardians of important locations, creates a sense that these were Vendrick's pieces on the game board of Drangleic. He placed them strategically, knowing they would hold their positions and defend against any threat. The twin Dragon Riders in Drangleic Castle guard the path to the king's inner sanctum. The one in Shrine of Amana protects the way to Vendrick's soul. The one in Undead Crypt blocks access to Velstadt and Vendrick himself. And the one in Haida? He might guard the memory of divinity itself, watching over ruins that represent humanity's attempt to preserve something of the god's glory. The placement could reflect Vendrick's understanding that some places matter not for what they contain, but for what they represent. And Haida represents the dream of reclaiming divine favor, of building something that can endure, even as the fire fades. When you defeat the Dragon Rider in Haida's Tower of Flame, his soul can be traded for various items, including his shield and bow. But more importantly, his death has consequences in Scholar of the First Sin. The passive Haida Knights throughout the area suddenly become hostile, rising from their seated positions and actively patrolling the ruins. It's as though the Dragon Rider's presence was the last thing keeping them in check, maintaining some kind of order or truce that his death shatters. This creates an interesting dynamic where the player's victory makes the area more dangerous rather than less. It's a clever subversion of expectations and also makes thematic sense. The Dragon Rider was a force of the present, Vendrick's soldier in the here and now. The Haida Knights are forces of the past, ancient warriors who predate Drangleic itself, With the modern authority removed, the Ancient Ones reclaim their domain, defending their fallen kingdom with the same fury they showed centuries ago. The Dragon Rider is both a boss and a statement. He represents Vendrick's power, the reach of Dranglag's military might, the loyalty of troops who will maintain their posts even when their king has fallen into madness. He's a skilled warrior, a champion among champions, someone who survived the horrific training required to master a worm and earned the right to be called Dragon Rider. And yet, for all that, he's just one more obstacle to overcome, one more guardian standing between you and your goal. In the grand tragedy that is Dark Souls 2, the Dragon Riders are perhaps the most straightforward figures. They had a job, they did it well, and they continued doing it even when everything else fell apart. There's honor in that, a kind of noble simplicity. They were never going to solve the curse or save the kingdom or achieve anything beyond maintaining their posts. But they maintained those posts. And in a world of shifting loyalties and hidden agendas and corruption at every level, that simple dedication to duty is almost refreshing. The Dragon Rider awaits in Hyda's Tower of Flame, standing guard over ruins that mean nothing to him personally, defending a location that Vendrick may have assigned to him for reasons long forgotten. He doesn't question his orders, or wonder if there's a point to what he's doing. He's a Dragon Rider, one of the elite, and this is his post. That's all the reason he needs. When you enter his arena and the fight begins, he will give you everything he has, wielding his halberd with the skill of a master and fighting with the determination of a warrior who knows his duty. And when he falls, when his soul rises from his defeated form, and another guardian of Drangleic passes into memory, the ruins of Hyda change. The ancient nights rise. The past reclaims what the present briefly held, and the Tower of Flame burns on, indifferent to both conqueror and conquered, modern and ancient, living and dead. The old dragon slayer was a logical thread. When Guinevere fled Anor Londo, Ornstein went with her. His duty was to protect the princess, not to guard an empty city or serve a dark sun who perpetuated an illusion. So he followed her to Hyda, helped establish the kingdom, and remained there as her guardian even as the divine family dispersed, and the world continued its long slide toward darkness. But if this is Ornstein, what changed him? Why dark magic instead of lightning? One interpretation points to practical considerations. In Hyda, where worship shifted toward flame god Flann and away from the Age of Fire orthodoxy, Ornstein might have adapted his fighting style accordingly. Dark magic, which has connections to occult power, would prove effective against beings like Gwyn if the Lord of Sunlight ever came seeking his wayward daughter. It's an unsettling thought that Ornstein might have prepared to fight his former lord. But it fits the theme of loyalty to Guinevere over loyalty to Gwyn. An alternative reading focuses on corruption by the Abyss. We know from the first game that Ornstein's fellow knight Artorias fell to the Abyss during his attempt to fight Manus. Ornstein could have had a similar encounter, or prolonged exposure to dark over many years might have slowly transformed him. The shift from lightning to dark would reflect this corruption, his golden armor tarnishing to black, as his very essence moved from light to shadow. But there's a problem with the "this is literally Ornstein" theory. Dark Souls 3 complicates matters by placing Ornstein's armor at the Archdragon Peak, with a description stating that he left Anor Londo to search for the Nameless King, Gwyn's firstborn son, who was struck from the records for his betrayal. If Ornstein left to find the Nameless King, how could he also have come to Hyder with Guinevere? The timelines don't align unless we invoke the standard Dark Souls explanation of time being convoluted. This complication points toward an alternative interpretation that's gained considerable traction in the community. What if the old Dragon Slayer isn't Ornstein himself, but rather a reincarnation of his soul? Dark Souls 2 builds heavily on the theme of souls reincarnating, taking new forms while retaining echoes of what they once were. The four great souls of the Lords from the first game have found new hosts in the Rotten, the Lost Sinner, the Old Iron King, and Duke's dear Freya. Ornstein's powerful soul, granted to him by Gwyn for his service as captain of the four knights, could follow a similar pattern. This framework would account for both the similarities and the differences. The reincarnated soul retains Ornstein's fighting style, his preference for spears and thrust attacks, his legendary speed and aggression. But the new vessel is different, transformed by the circumstances of rebirth, by the location where it manifested, by the magic available in this new age. The result is something that resembles Ornstein, fights like Ornstein, but isn't quite Ornstein, a shadow or echo rather than the original. There's yet another angle that draws on the deeper lore implications. We know that civilizations following Hyder inherited knowledge of golem craft from Anor Londo, the art of placing souls into artificial constructs to create living automatons. The old Dragon Slayer could represent exactly that, a golem created using Ornstein's soul and armored in his image. Such a construct would fight like Ornstein because it contains his soul and memories, but it would manifest as dark rather than golden, because it was created in this diminished age using different methods and materials. Each theory has merit, and the game deliberately avoids giving us a definitive answer. The old Dragon Slayer soul description is vague, noting only that he is reminiscent of a certain knight that appears in old legends. He's not confirmed to be Ornstein, merely reminiscent of him. The whole encounter is structured as a mystery, a puzzle for players to unravel using the scarce evidence available. What we can say with certainty is this: whoever or whatever the old Dragon Slayer is, he's guarding the Cathedral of Blue with the same dedication Ornstein showed when guarding Guinevere in Anor Londo. The cathedral is important to the way of Blue Covenant, serving as both headquarters and symbol. Having such a powerful guardian makes sense from a practical standpoint, even if his presence raises metaphysical questions. The fight itself is a treat for anyone who struggled with Ornstein in the first game. This time, there's no smoke to worry about, no super-powered phase where the surviving knight absorbs his partner's strength. It's just you and the old Dragon Slayer, one-on-one, in a much more manageable encounter. His attacks are familiar to veterans: the lightning-fast spear thrusts, the jumping overhead slam, the charge across the arena. But now instead of dodging lightning, you're dodging dark orbs, and that changes the rhythm just enough to keep things interesting. He can be parried, which Ornstein couldn't be in the first game, at least not reliably. This opens up opportunities for riposte fishing, though it's risky given how fast his attacks come out. More conservative strategies involve circling to his left, staying close to avoid his ranged dark magic, and punishing his longer recovery animations with a couple quick strikes before backing off. The dark magic adds new dimensions to the fight. The dark shot fires multiple orbs in sequence, forcing you to dodge in specific patterns or duck behind one of the cathedral's pillars for cover. The dark crash, his butt slam attack, has a wider area of effect than you might expect, and lingers just long enough to catch players who dodge too early. These aren't dramatically different from fighting Super Ornstein in the first game, but they're different enough to prevent muscle memory from carrying you through entirely. Defeating the old Dragon Slayer grants access to the deeper areas of the Cathedral of Blue, where Blue Sentinel Targray waits to induct you into his covenant. More immediately, the soul can be traded to Weaponsmith Ornifex for the Dragon Slayer Spear, that legendary weapon capable of launching enemies into the air with its charge attack. Getting your hands on Ornstein's signature weapon is reward enough for many players, a tangible connection to one of Dark Souls' most iconic encounters. But the deeper reward is the mystery itself. The old Dragon Slayer represents everything that makes Dark Souls lore fascinating. He's familiar yet foreign, clearly connected to the broader mythology yet standing apart from it in crucial ways. The game gives you just enough information to form theories, but never enough to confirm them definitively. Is he Ornstein? A reincarnation? A golem? Something else entirely? The answer depends on how you interpret the evidence, what you choose to believe about souls and time, and the strange rules governing this world. There's something fitting about finding this mysterious figure in Hyda's Tower of Flame. This is a place defined by its connection to the divine, by its attempt to preserve something of the age of gods in a world that has moved beyond them. The old Dragon Slayer is similarly caught between ages, a figure from the past existing in the present, defending a cathedral in a drowned kingdom, serving gods or purposes that may no longer exist. When you face him in that cathedral, when you dodge his spear and avoid his dark magic and finally strike the blow that fells him, you're not just defeating a boss. You're encountering a piece of living history, a fragment of the Age of Fire, somehow persisting into this darker time. Whether he's the real Ornstein or just an echo hardly matters in that moment. What matters is that he stands there, guarding his post, maintaining his duty, embodying the ideals of knighthood long after the kingdom that valued those ideals has crumbled to dust. The old Dragon Slayer is a guardian without a clear purpose, a knight without a kingdom to serve, a warrior whose identity has become uncertain even to himself. But he has the cathedral, and he has his duty, and he has his spear. In the world of Dark Souls, sometimes that's enough. Sometimes all you need is a place to stand and a purpose to fulfill, even if no one remembers why that purpose matters anymore. He waits in the Cathedral of Blue, this old Dragon Slayer, breathing steadily behind his dark helm, ready to test anyone who approaches his sanctum. The cathedral may be mostly empty now, the congregation long dispersed, the glory days far behind. But he remains. He endures. And he will continue to endure, fighting anyone who enters his domain, until someone strong enough comes along to finally put him to rest. The Cathedral and the Covenant. Beyond the old Dragon Slayer's cathedral chamber, up a flight of stairs, you find him. Blue Sentinel Targray stands in the upper reaches of the Cathedral of Blue, looking out over the flooded ruins of Hyda with an expression that suggests both pride and melancholy. He is the leader of the Blue Sentinel's Covenant, a rigid and disciplined warrior who dedicates his life to a cause he considers absolute. When he speaks, there's a formality to his words, a sense that he's performed these speeches many times and taken pride in each iteration. But before you can join his covenant, before he'll even acknowledge you as anything more than a transient being unworthy of his notice, you need to prove yourself. you must possess a token of fidelity, an item earned by successfully helping another player defeat a boss as a phantom or found in specific locations throughout Tranquil. This requirement isn't arbitrary. It demonstrates that you're capable of protecting others, that you've put aside your own interests to aid someone in need. These are the core virtues of the Blue Sentinels and its parent organization, the Way of Blue. The Way of Blue is described as not being a developed religion, but rather a humble prayer that spread naturally among those seeking help. This is significant. Unlike many covenants in Dark Souls, which focus on conquest, power, or personal gain, the Way of Blue exists purely to protect the weak. When members of the Way are invaded by dark spirits, Blue Sentinels can be automatically summoned to defend them, turning a potentially one-sided encounter into a fairer fight. Targray oversees the original chapter of the Blue Sentinels, based here in the Cathedral of Blue in Haida. He's demanding and sometimes comes across as condescending, speaking to those who haven't earned his respect, as though they're beneath his notice. But this rigid exterior conceals a selfless and stoic nature. Targray isn't arrogant in the traditional sense. He genuinely believes in the righteousness of his cause, in the importance of protecting the innocent and punishing the guilty. His dismissiveness toward the unproven comes from a place of high standards rather than personal superiority. When he finally accepts you into the covenant, his words carry weight. He proclaims you a Knight of the Blue, grants you the Guardian's seal ring, and explains your duties. Wear the ring, and you'll hear the voices of Blue Apostles crying out for help when they're invaded. Answer those cries, repel the malicious invaders, and through this service, elevate yourself to a higher plane. It's not just about helping others. It's about self-improvement through selfless action, achieving a state of mind that transcends base concerns. The Covenant has ranks achieved through defending Way of Blue members or invading and defeating sinners using cracked blue-eye orbs. These orbs can only be used by Blue Sentinels and specifically target players who have accumulated sin through killing NPCs or invading and slaying other players. It's a system of justice, allowing the Blues to hunt down those who prey on others. Rise through the ranks, and Targray will reward you with items, including powerful miracles and eventually his own armor set. There's a duality to the Blue Sentinels that's fascinating. They defend the weak through automated summoning, but they also actively hunt wrongdoers through invasions. They're both shield and sword, protectors and executioners. This reflects a more sophisticated view of justice than simple passive defense. Sometimes protecting the innocent requires seeking out and eliminating threats before they can cause more harm. The cathedral itself is a fitting headquarters for such an organization. Even in ruins, it maintains a sense of grandeur and purpose. The architecture echoes Anor Londo's divine halls, reminding everyone who enters that this covenant has its roots in the Age of Gods. Blue Sentinels are specifically said to seek to emulate Queller, the god of dreams, though details about this deity are sparse. The connection suggests the covenant aspires to an ideal, a perfect state of protective vigilance that may be more dream than reality, but is worth pursuing nonetheless. Targray's devotion is absolute. He remained in Tranquil even as people began fleeing the ruined kingdom, even after he himself became undead. His covenant work continued, training knights, defending apostles, maintaining the tradition that began in Haida long ago. This dedication is both admirable and slightly tragic. He's defending a system that may no longer be necessary or effective, maintaining traditions for their own sake rather than because they serve a clear purpose. The Way of Blue was founded in ancient Haida, and its origin story tells us something important about the kingdom's values. This wasn't a warlike nation focused on conquest and expansion. Haida valued protection, community, mutual aid. The covenant that emerged from its culture reflects these priorities. Even now, with the kingdom drowned and most of its population long dead, the Way of Blue persists, spreading to other lands, offering comfort and protection to those who need it. Joining the covenant comes with responsibilities. When you wear the Guardian's seal, you can be automatically summoned to any Way of Blue member's world when they're invaded. You could be in the middle of fighting a difficult boss, exploring a dangerous area, or just resting at a bonfire when suddenly you're pulled away to defend a stranger. For some players, this is an inconvenience. For others, it's the entire point, the satisfaction of arriving just in time to save someone from an invader. The Covenant also offers dueling opportunities. 3 statues near the Blue Cathedral bonfire allow members to fight each other in structured PvP matches, wagering tokens of fidelity for the chance to prove their skill. Each statue leads to a different arena with unique hazards and layouts. These duels serve as training, allowing Blue Sentinels to hone their abilities without the unpredictable variables of defending against actual invasions. But there's a darker aspect to the Covenant that emerges when you dig deeper. Targray's absolute certainty in the righteousness of his cause, his unwavering belief that the Blue Sentinels represent an objective good, suggests a rigid moral framework that may not account for complexity. The item description for the Blue Knight's halberd notes that those who put faith in an absolute good also believe in the existence of true evil, but that to others, the distinction between the two can be quite unclear. This is a subtle but important critique. The Blue Sentinels see the world in black and white. Invaders are evil, members of the Way are innocent, and the Blues' job is to protect the latter from the former. But what about grey areas? What about invaders who are simply desperate for souls to level up, or who are driven to violence by circumstances? What about Way of Blue members who use the Covenant as a crutch, never learning to defend themselves? The halberd's description suggests these questions exist, but that Targray and his followers have no interest in engaging with them. There's also the question of what the Blue Sentinels are really achieving. In a world where death is rarely permanent for the undead, where invasions are a natural part of the hostile landscape, does defending Way of Blue members actually accomplish anything meaningful? Or is it just another way for the undead to give themselves purpose, to feel like they're doing something important in a world that has long since stopped making sense? Targray doesn't seem to struggle with these doubts. He has his mission, his training regimen, his absolute faith that he's doing the will of the gods. When you reach the highest rank in his covenant, he gifts you his armor with pride, acknowledging you as a true Knight of the Blue. There's genuine warmth in this gesture, a sense that despite his rigid exterior, he cares about his fellow covenant members and takes pride in their achievements. The cathedral's location in Haida adds layers to the Covenant's meaning. This is where the Way of Blue began, in a kingdom that valued protection over conquest, community over individualism. The Blue Sentinels are trying to preserve that legacy, to keep alive ideals that may seem quaint or outdated in the harsh reality of Drangleic. They're fighting a rearguard action against cynicism and despair, insisting that some things are worth defending, that some causes are worth serving, even when the world seems determined to prove otherwise. When you stand in the cathedral, looking out over the flooded ruins where Targray maintains his vigil, you can see both the nobility and the futility of his position. He's a knight in a drowned kingdom, leading a covenant dedicated to protecting people in a world where protection is temporary at best. He trains tirelessly to elevate himself to a higher plane, but that higher plane seems increasingly divorced from the reality of undead existence. Yet there's something beautiful in the attempt. Targray and his blue sentinels represent the idea that we can choose to serve something greater than ourselves. That duty and protection and selfless action have value even when their practical impact is questionable. They're fighting not because they expect to win, but because fighting for the right reasons is its own reward. The Blue Sentinel's covenant is a remnant of Hyda's legacy, a piece of the kingdom that survived even when the stones were swallowed by the sea. As long as Targray stands in that cathedral, as long as Knights of the Blue answer the call to defend Way of Blue members, as long as the covenant persists, Hyda isn't completely dead. Its values endure, carried forward by warriors who believe that protection, loyalty, and service to others are worth pursuing even in a dying world. And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps that's all any of us can hope for. To find something worth fighting for, and to keep fighting for it, even when the odds are hopeless and the outcome is predetermined. The Blue Sentinels may not be able to save the world or end the curse or restore what's been lost, but they can be there when someone calls for help. They can answer that call. And in doing so, they keep alive the dream of Hyda, the vision of a kingdom where people looked after each other, where the strong protected the weak, where community mattered more than individual glory. Targray waits in his cathedral, proud and rigid and utterly dedicated. The Way of Blue endures, humble and hopeful, offering protection to those who need it. And the Tower of Flame burns on, a beacon in the darkness, a reminder that some lights refuse to be extinguished, no matter how long the night becomes. The duplicitous cleric,